Hello, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Ben, and with me tonight is Jim.
Well, I was not expecting that. You usually do the exact same high energy. I'll do it for you because I miss it.
No, hear it. I'll redo it, but I want to explain why I just did that. This movie that we watched, Underworld, Rise of the Lycans, is more vibe than movie. And I was trying to bring a new vibe to this podcast. But if you felt a little weird, hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Ben, and with me is
Jim. It's the Jimster.
The Jiminator. I don't like that either. It's fine. But okay, so
I feel like if you had just started normal, we wouldn't have this problem. You had to vibe it up.
Well, it'll loop back because this movie has that problem, and we'll get to it. But before we do you want to go through the plot, or do you want me to go through the facts?
I think I should do the plot. So, but I'm just going to do it for you because I can't, just hear me out. This is how you, for the last 19 podcasts, have introduced us. Okay. So I can't have one that doesn't do it now. Ready? Okay. So here we go. It's usually Ben doing this, but today it's Jim because Ben can't get it together. Okay. So hello and welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. My name is Ben, and with me here today is...
my name's Jim.
And this is the podcast where we watch movies and inflict them upon each other. Today's movie was good. Underworld, Rise of the Lycans. So that is what Ben would usually do for us. And I have now provided that service for our 3 listeners, so that they can enjoy that. But look, I'm going to do my job, which is I am going to plot the movie for us. So this is where we do a detailed summary of everything that happens in the film so that you don't have to watch it if you decided to not watch it with us. So Underworld, Rise of the Lycans. This is the 3rd chapter in the Underworld movie franchise, as selected by Ben on the last podcast. But it's technically my pick because we did a quizzy thing. It was great. You check out the last podcast if you haven't watched it.
Check out the last 19.
So here we go. This is the plot. We are set in the Dark Ages, okay? So we're in a definite prequel land here. Lucian is the first werewolf born who is capable of taking human form and the first to be called a Lycan. Victor, a vampire elder played to perfection by Bill Nighy, raises the child, envisioning a race of Lycan slaves guarding his coven's fortress during the day and working as laborers for the vampires at night. The countryside, however, is filled with wild and savage werewolves who are born from the original werewolf William's rampage, and the human nobles are begging Victor and his coven for protection against the beasts, which he grants in exchange for tributes of silver, which enables him to keep his slaves under control. Now, as Lucian grows up, he and Victor's daughter Sonia fall in love, and in their adult years they begin a secretive, intimate relationship. Sonia is reckless and insubordinate, and one night Lucian escapes the shackles, preventing him from turning into a full-on werewolf, and rescues Sonia from his feral werewolf brethren in the wild. Now, despite acknowledging that Lucian rescued his daughter, Victor cannot forgive the escape and has Lucian whipped and imprisoned. Now, by trading her seat on the Vampire Council, Sonia enlists the help of Andreas Tanis, who is another vampire, in orchestrating Lucian's release. Lucian, unable to flee all by himself, liberates all the other Lycans as he escapes the fortress. Sonia remains, planning to meet Lucian in 3 days. As she prepares to leave, she is visited by her father. Victor asks if she assisted in Lucian's escape, but she denies it. He, unfortunately, discovers the truth, though, by biting her neck and reading her memories through the blood, which is a thing that vampires can do in this universe. Discovering her relationship with Lucian this way, He imprisons her. Lucian recruits human slaves and the werewolves out in the wild to build a force to go against the vampires. In the fortress, the vampire council and nobles demand that Victor recapture Lucian, as his Lycans have been attacking all of the human estates in the area, freeing their slaves and offering them immortality as Lycans themselves by turning them. Victor replies that he's confident Lucian will return because he's got something that Lucian wants: Sonia, his daughter. Lucian learns about Sonia's imprisonment and rescues her from her room, but Victor stops them from escaping. Sonia, hoping to spare Lucian's life, reveals to Victor that she is pregnant with Lucian's child. Dun dun dun! Who knew that could happen? Disgusted, Victor overpowers her and imprisons both her and Lucian. Sonia is unanimously sentenced to death by the Vampire Council at a trial presided over by her father, and she is executed by exposure to sunlight while Lucian watches and screams, "No, Sonia!" etc. An enraged and heartbroken Lucian transforms into a werewolf, but his attempt to escape the fortress is thwarted by the vampire death dealers. But he gives a giant roar, communicates with the wild werewolves, and summons them to storm the fortress. And then the wild werewolves blend together with his werewolves who are waiting for him at the tree line, and a giant battle happens. Victor runs away with Tanis. Lucian pursues him, thinks he's killed Victor, hasn't killed Victor, and then the rest of the movies happen, centuries in the future, with a little ending narration by Kate Beckinsale, who pops up for really just a voiceover cameo here.
What a fantastic synopsis, Jim, and thank you for the fantastic energy behind it. Really think like you're carrying this one. But
yeah, I feel that too. I'm coming
to play. So here are the facts. Released in 2009, directed by Patrick Tateopoulos. Now, he pretty much only ever directed this movie. He has done some shorts, some commercial work, and some music videos. But what he is actually known for is a production designer of all Jim's favorite movies: Pitch Black, Underworld, The Chronicles of Riddick, Independence Day, Zack Snyder's Justice League, and Stuart Little.
He also designed the 1990s American Godzilla, okay? And also, the main character in that movie is named after him as like an homage, which is super cool. He also designed the dragon from Outlander, which is a movie we absolutely have to watch at some point.
Outlander.
That is a line that is delivered in that fashion in that movie. So look, lots of love for Patrick Tatopoulos over the years, giving us a lot of awesome production design, and in this case,
he gives it in this movie too. But I think there's a reason he's only directed one feature, and where we just watched it. And hey, look, just spoilers. I did enjoy the movie. I had a lot of fun in the movie, but doesn't mean there weren't things wrong with it. Screenplay by Danny McBride, not the one you're thinking of. Dirk Blackman and Howard McCain. Story by Len Wiseman, Robert Orr, and Danny McBride. Edited. I don't often always include the edited, but I have things to talk about the editing in this film. Peter Amundsen, Pacific Rim, Hellboy, Mortal Kombat 95, Blade 2, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Shipwrecked. I like throwing in a weird one at the end. It makes me feel happy.
I can tell that, yeah. That's
starring Michael Sheen, Bill Nye the Science Guy, Rona Murder,
Stephen. Bill Nye the Science Guy. It's not the Science Guy. It's just Bill Nye, British actor.
Bill Nye, British actor. Rona Murder, Stephen McIntosh, Kevin. I'm going to stuff this up. Grevu, who is also the co-creator of the series and plays Braze. Budget, $35 million. Box office, $92.4 million. I'm also including something else here because I looked it up because I was certain it would be true. The DVD sales on this were bonkers. Sony's reported DVD sales were $43.4 million worth of sales for the single disc special edition of this film. That's before Blu-ray and stuff.
I'm unsurprised.
This is a DVD movie. This whole series is one of those people like bought the box sets of. So, look, I enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed this movie because I love lore. Lore. And this movie is just a lore movie for the rest of these movies. But yeah, some wild stuff happens. But okay, you picked this series for a reason, and you didn't expect me to pick this one. So how did you feel when I picked this one?
Oh, look, it's weird because I of the 5 movies, the 5 Underworld movies, this is the only one I know you've seen. So it
I've
was
seen the
kind of
first
like,
three. I haven't
well,
seen
there
the
you
other
go.
two.
There you go. That doesn't surprise me, but I know you've seen this one because we actually saw it together
Yeah.
at the cinemas. It's one of I think the only Underworld movie that we actually saw together back in the day. And you'd already seen it. And I
Was I working
remember,
at the cinemas at the time?
I think so.
Yeah.
But I remember I was like, I want to go see Underworld. We come see it. And I think you were like, it was okay. But then, as you often did, you were like, yeah, fine, I'll come see it again. And so I knew you'd already seen this one. I knew you didn't really rate it that highly, but I mean, how did it play in hindsight? I mean, it's been a while since
I
2009, Ben.
I probably liked it more than I liked it when I originally watched it. I could kind of let go a little bit more. I've never been a super pretentious moviegoer, but back then I thought I knew what a good film was, and now a good film is just something that entertains me. And this entertains me for not all the right reasons, but for some of the right reasons.
And this will be no surprise. I really love the production design of this movie. So that's probably my favorite part. That and strangely, the color grade. Now, the Underworld movies are famous for basically shooting everything at night and making everything blue.
So blue.
And it's a really sort of extreme take on what they call Hollywood moon, whereby you're trying to cheat the fact that the moon is actually illuminating the scenes. Now, Underworld has always taken that to extremes, and every light source is blue in most of the Underworld movies, including artificial light indoors. It's just an aesthetic that they went for, and boy, did they go for it. But in this third one, they actually did some really cool stuff by retaining that overall cool blue look, but then adding lots of green into it, and also having sort of spots of orange color with the torches, because we're in this sort of dark ages kind of world. And of course they shot in New Zealand, and used a lot of the Lord of the Rings team on the production design. Dan Hanna was the actual production designer, and obviously Patrick Tatopoulos, brought his own background as director as well. And I think the thing just looks great. It's a great looking movie. The sets look fantastic. I really thought they played well with the established visual aesthetic of the films, and I just really like the way it looks.
Yeah, and look, the way it looks physically is fantastic, and this is unfortunately on the cusp of let's use CGI in everything we do, because the CGI, especially with the werewolves, doesn't hold up great. And it's really particularly just the final scene, which is kind of an exciting battle. Like, you have these wild werewolves who basically are being called by an alpha in this universe, and they obey his command, and they just look so put on top of the scene. Like, they're just like, there they are. They don't kind of blend in very well or anything like that. The action involved with them is quite good, but I think even they realized the problem, because a lot of the big fights are human werewolves versus vampires. Like Michael Sheen, you don't want to waste him behind a CGI werewolf, so you have a lot of his combat scenes in front of the thing. Like the guy who plays Reyes, a lot of his big action is as a human being. But it's pretty minor. If you can honestly look past the werewolves and how they look, it's awesome. I mean, they do really well with the vampires because they have to do so much less. It's just kind of teeth and blue eyes and fast movement. But yeah, yeah.
It's also the Underworld movies. They never had huge budgets, and this one's the same. But it's incredibly ambitious. There's legions and legions of werewolves, sort of storming the castle and fighting, and this kind of epic scale is not something you'd really seen in an Underworld movie before. And they still only spent 35 million on the film, and you can see that all that money went straight into the physical builds of the production with regard to the vampire castle, which takes up most of the movie and is the main location for the film. So, so I'm not so the CG it looks a little shaky, but again, I kind of forgive that because of the it's quite obvious where they spent their money, and they didn't have an awful lot of it either. So,
and I also want to say, just with the werewolves, before this, the previous two movies, it was always 1 to 5 werewolves in a dimly lit space, like not a lot of lighting. So what they were doing in reference to the rest of the series was really ambitious, like really ambitious. Like an open air, well lit army fight was kind of crazy on paper when you look at the rest of the series. And as I said, they pulled it off enough. They really did.
Yeah. And I actually like this film more now than I did when I first saw it, I think it plays a bit better now. Like, the thing is, you've got Michael Sheen in the lead role, and he is an actor who is really fantastic, and this material is not something that he usually does. And he just sort of, he's usually in things like Frost Nixon, where he's doing political dramas, or
Good Omens.
Or he's playing Tony Blair or something like that. He does these sort of, very kind of established drama roles. And here he is, in this genre piece, and he's absolutely, going for it. So I think he does a really great job. Very much anchors the whole movie, and this is the most Bill Nighy we get in any of the Underworld movies, even though he, is synonymous with the series from the first one. But he has more scenes here. He has more strange, odd inflections and line deliveries that he's sort of known for. And he's obviously just having a fantastic time, literally kind of making this over-the-top vampire kind of character. So,
when you see excellent actors in a film like this, Michael Sheen and Bill Nighy, it actually shows you how good they are and how committed they are as actors, right? There are plenty of Hollywood actors who would choose this film towards an end of a career because they needed that last quick dollar, right? But these guys, who are literally brilliant actors, not at the end of their careers at all, are in these films and just like, they give it their all, and they are good. They're engaging. Like, there are characters in this movie who are not engaging. And look, I don't think it's particularly her fault, but the character itself is pretty much designed to just create conflict wherever it goes. And that is the character. Is it Sonia? What's her name?
Sonia, yeah.
Sonia, Rona Mirta. Her character is written to create conflict. That's all it is, right? She's there to kind of get you from A to conflict to end. And because of that, her writing suffers and her acting is not great. But her action is awesome. Like, she does some really cool action, especially that fight in the forest where he saves her, right? That is a kind of multi-leveled, three-dimensional fight, like underground, above ground, through the caravan. Like, it's really kind of fun to watch. They do action in this movie quite well, except when they have to do over-the-top violence, and they do some weird cutaways and things like that to obviously avoid the worst of it. But yeah, no, unfortunately, yeah, in these movies, this genre of movies in general, unfortunately, the female leads suffer. Underworld in general doesn't suffer from this. Obviously, its main lead character is a female in all the other films. But yeah, this one, unfortunately,
well, it's interesting. This movie is, it's a Romeo and Juliet story that we've seen many times before. And really kind of the beats of the actual plot is perhaps the weakest element of the actual film, where we kind of know that this is a doomed love, and it's not going to go well. And that, it's kind of, basically set up to fail from the start, and there's a lot of Romeo and Juliet in there, so it's probably not really the strongest part of the movie. So much as this is a movie that, and in fact this whole series, I like this series. I think it's interesting. I think it's fun. I don't think I could stretch to say it's particularly good. Do you know what I mean? It's not really something, much as I'm sort of on here being like, hey, I liked this, I liked that, I liked the other. I'm like, yeah, I do like it all, but it's kind of hard to say this is good. There's something inherently kind of genre and sort of B grade about just the premise and whatnot. But man, they execute it as best as they possibly can, with their resources, and there's full commitment on show. So it's hard to say it's not a good time, in various sequences. So particularly when Bill Nye is on the screen. So I also just love, like, you were talking about the lore, and it's just cool that, like, this is countryside that's overrun with these feral werewolves out there that they then have to kind of like round up and try and control. And I'm like, this is interesting, this is different, this is cool. Like, Dark Ages setting, there's lots to like here, and it's a really kind of interesting take on even the Underworld movies, which the first two were set, in the sort of present day or slightly into the future, even perhaps, and to head back in time with this one. Like, I'm kind of surprised they didn't stay with this aesthetic a bit longer and even have other stories that were period pieces in this series, and particularly after the success that they had on DVD. But even they were still a box office success. So that was a little unusual for me that they didn't continue this premise further.
Well, the lore of these films, if you want to get into a little bit, actually leads itself to the idea of more prequels. And I'm actually very honestly surprised they didn't do it either. So the whole concept of vampires and werewolves in this movie, it kind of gets pieced out in about 3 or 4 movies, the kind of total lore here. But basically, there's this thing called the Corvinus or Corvus strain.
Corvinus
strain, which is basically, there was this dude who became the first immortal through a series of circumstances. He had 3 sons, 2 dominant with the gene and 1 recessive with the gene. And basically, the 2 dominants through happenstance became werewolves and vampires. And as they talked about before, William's rampage, the werewolf couldn't control it, and he went around just fighting everybody, converting more werewolves. Like the European countryside was awash with death and destruction. And basically, the other brother, the vampire, sired specific people, one of them being Victor, to basically combat this scourge, to combat this virus, and created this elite cast of vampires. And then that kind of literally travels all the way through the movies until I think you probably get to the 4th one, when it kind of changes up a little bit, if I've read correctly. But it's this kind of interesting lore to... It uses existing vampire and werewolf lore, like the whole silver, the sunlight, all that sort of stuff. But it adds, I think, an interesting twist on the whole subgenre that is vampires, werewolves, and modern day settings. And I think this movie does a really good job of kind of continuing that and extending that. But they could have gone more into the original Scourge. Like, I'd love to see a movie of the original Williams Rampage, like, and people dealing with that, humans, vampires, whoever. I think that'd be awesome. But yeah, there's definitely, strangely enough, in a film that's not known super for plot, there's a lot of fertile ground for more stories in this universe.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, I think it was a good move to actually do this prequel set in the far past for this series, even though at the time it seemed like a terrible idea. You got to remember, in 2009, when people thought of prequels, we were fresh off the Star Wars prequel trilogy, which at that time, when it was released, wasn't very well regarded. And in fact,
they hadn't come back around yet.
No, but people have now. They grow to love those movies, but at the time, the word prequel was almost sort of a word that people didn't really want to hear in association with a franchise that they enjoyed. So it was kind of pretty bold of them to do it, and I think they did it really well. So yeah, are you glad that I made you watch this one, Ben? Even though you kind of picked it yourself, but
yeah, I am. As I said, that it's a fun movie to mull over. Like, it's got some bad bits, it's got some great bits, but it's also one of those movies where you can let your mind wander and kind of go, what would I do? Like, not a lot of movies allow that because their nature is a beginning and an end, but this is something that exists in a wider world, and it's really fun. I did want to bring up lastly, just the character of Lucian. So before this movie, we had only seen Lucian as a villain. And a pretty awful one, really, like opportunistic, exploitative, violent, murderer, awful. And this movie does kind of like a Vader in that it gives him a reason. Because he's the good guy in this movie. Like, you can't look at this movie and go I'm rooting for Lucian. But it also is the movie that takes everything away from him and kind of sets him up to kind of turn into what he's presented as in the first two movies. I just thought that was kind of interesting for a movie like this to actually take that effort. Like, these movies could have done the Resident Evil, right? They can just keep plodding along, keep twisting the formula slightly, but they actually kind of went out of their way to create more character for a character that's not in any way a main character really in the other films.
No, I mean this film is functionally, there's a story that he tells, and there's a flashback that you see in the first movie.
Yes.
And that is this movie, which actually leads to an interesting inconsistency with the film. So the sequence of Sonya's death in Underworld: Rise of the Lycans, we've seen before in the first Underworld movie in sort of one of those crazy, vampire bite flashbacks. And of course, it was shot, years earlier and on a completely different set with a different actress playing Sonya, and it really is kind of interesting that the sequences don't really match at all.
It wouldn't have been hard.
It's just, you just have to sort of accept that we're seeing the same event twice, but both times it looks radically different. So
but overall, I liked the movie. My recommendation would be to definitely watch the first two first, if you are going to do this, just because I think it gives you a bit more of a reward in watching this film. Because as I said, like otherwise you're a bit light on.
It's also that idea of this being a prequel. You think, oh well, the events are set beforehand, but all of the plot of this movie is actually played out as reveals for characters in the first two. So if you watch this one first, then those things that are set up as dramatic reveals you miss because you already knew them because you'd watched this one. So it's one of those weird things where it's sort of like, what order do you watch it in? Even though this is chronologically first, well, you should keep it where it is as the third film. Otherwise, the first two films kind of suffer there. So, which is that weird phenomenon that you have with prequels. I mean, George Lucas still says, "Hey, yeah, you should watch the prequels first," but
incorrect.
It's not right,
No.
because for the exact same reason, So it's this was the first time that the one of the core creators and director of the first two, Len Wiseman, was actually stepping away from the series in terms of directorially, and giving over the reins, but he was still involved as producer and involved in the screenplay in its early stages, and that's a role that he would then adopt from here on out with the series. So it's that interesting thing of sort of handing on the torch, if you like, to try and keep it going. And it's funny that you mentioned Resident Evil, because this series and the Resident Evil series were basically playing ping pong with the same genre crowd over the same period of years, as they sort of went sequel for sequel for sequel for sequel, and they were both doing something very similar. This in the vampire werewolf space, Resident Evil in the zombie space, but they were hitting the same crowd. They were hitting with the same kind of budget level, and very much kind of competitors, where the audience who enjoyed this kind of film just were the winners there, because they got this sort of
it scratches the same itch. Like, it's easily consumable, don't have to think too hard, fun to watch cinema with some lore. And look, I'm going to use the word here, but I don't mean it in its exact context. It's sexy cinema. All the people in the movie look pretty good looking. They're not overly flirtatious. They're not overly showing too much skin in most of the movies, but they're all really good looking people on screen, fly kicking each other, shooting each other, and kind of having a great time. And as I said, like, it definitely hits that demographic of, I don't want to think too much. I want to watch a woman be awesome and annihilate a bunch of vampires or zombies, and I want to go home and not have to think too much about it.
It's also interesting that both of these series, are basically, they were really sold, and I said this before, but Resident Evil was the same. They were really sold as horror movies, but they're not. They're action movies. They're actually action movies that are masquerading as horror movies for people who perhaps don't really watch horror movies.
Well, one's
So it's
a movie based on video games, and one's another movie that should have been based or turned into a video game. It probably has been, not a good one, but they both fit that kind of video game feel.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, thank you for heading down to the Underworld adventure with me. I hope you enjoyed your time in the blue, green, dark. What have you got for me for our next adventure?
Okay, so if you've at all thought about what my possible picks could be in the future, you've definitely probably come across this film in your head. The last few weeks for me have been really hectic work-wise. It's really busy, brain-draining, hard work. So I want a comfort film. I want something that I can put on, watch, and know I'm going to love it, even though I've seen it maybe 400 times. Do you have a guess of what this film is, Jim?
No, because with you, that could be almost anything.
I've in the past called this my rainy day film, a film I can put on any time of the day. Oh no! To maybe the second greatest film ever made, Jim.
Are we watching Groundhog Day?
Groundhog Day is maybe my favorite movie of all time, and I need a pick-me-up, so this is my pick-me-up. And you know what's picked me up a little bit more? You don't seem super psyched about it, so it's a twofer. It's a twofer.
Look.
So, Bill Murray, Andy McDowell, Groundhog Day. I have been obsessed with this film at points in my life. I'm really looking forward to watching it over the next week, maybe multiple times, because that's the sickness I have for this film. So, yeah, not super stoked there, Jim?
The reason I'm not super psyched is actually you, because I don't mind Groundhog Day as a film, but being your friend since I was 12 years old, I've heard you talk about Groundhog Day so much over so many years that it kind of makes me dislike Groundhog Day, even though that's not the movie's fault. That's your fault for just bringing it up at like every different time and hour of the day. And it's like, it's kind of like Groundhog Day, and it's saying Groundhog Day, this happens and that happens. And I'm like, I'm a normal person. I enjoy Groundhog Day, but what you have going on is, as you said, a sickness. So, I'll watch it.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Best movie ever. I'm so excited. All right. So, next podcast will be Groundhog Day. And look, the podcast after that could be Groundhog Day. We never know.
But don't do that to me. That's not even a funny joke. That's like, that's
it 6 times in a row.
That's a gag, right? That's a gag that you think will play really well, and it will cost us dearly.
Crying so much.
I can't talk about Groundhog Day more than once, Ben.
That's the beauty of Groundhog Day. You absolutely can. All right, so if you want to listen to Groundhog Day, then you can do so in a couple of places. You can go to our YouTube channel, Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures on YouTube. You can go to our Spotify or iTunes, Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. If you want to kind of check us out, see some movie posters, see some little interesting facts maybe about the movies that we've watched, you can go to our Instagram, which is Jim_and_Ben. And I said it last podcast, and I'll say it this podcast. If you leave a comment on both our YouTube and our iTunes and rate and subscribe, I will DM you and I will let you help me pick, within reason, a movie that I will inflict upon Jim. And together you can share the joy of picking something like Groundhog Day. You can feel that Schadenfreude course through your veins. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me this week, Jim. I've really enjoyed watching Underworld with you, and I'm stoked to watch Groundhog Day with you.
All right. I will see you for the Groundhog Days. Bye bye.
So many times. Watch it over and over again.